Quite tired out by so many new and wonderful experiences, the princess sat down to rest at the foot of a tree, and there she fell fast asleep. Now it happened that it was in this very country that Prince Peerless had been set down, and while the Princess Sunbeam was still sleeping peacefully, he came strolling along in search of a shady pasture for his sheep. The moment he caught sight of the princess he recognized her as the charming shepherdess whose picture he had seen so often in the tower, and as she was far prettier than he had remembered her, he was delighted that chance had led him that way. He was still watching her admiringly when the princess opened her eyes, and as she also recognized him, they were soon great friends. The princess asked Prince Peerless, as he knew the country better than she did, to tell her of some peasant who would give her a lodging, and he said he knew of an old woman whose cottage would be the very place for her, it was so nice and so pretty. So they went there together, and the princess was charmed with the old woman and everything belonging to her. Supper was soon spread for her under a shady tree, and she invited the prince to share the cream and brown bread which the old woman provided. This he was delighted to do, and having first fetched from his own garden all the strawberries, cherries, nuts, and flowers he could find, they sat down together, and were very merry. After this they met every day as they guarded their flocks, and were so happy that Prince Peerless begged the princess to marry him, so that they might never be parted again. Now though the Princess Sunbeam appeared to be only a poor shepherdess, she never forgot that she was a real princess, and she was not at all sure that she ought to marry a humble shepherd, though she knew she would like to do so very much. So she resolved to consult an enchanter of whom she had heard a great deal since she had been a shepherdess, and without saying a word to anybody, she set out to find the castle in which he lived with his sister, who was a powerful fairy. The way was long, and lay through a thick wood, where the princess heard strange voices calling to her from every side, but she was in such a hurry that she stopped for nothing, and at last she came to the courtyard of the enchanter's castle. The grass and briars were growing as high as if it were 100 years since anyone had set foot there, but the princess got through at last, though she gave herself a good many scratches by the way. And then she went into a dark, gloomy hall, where there was but one tiny hole in the wall through which the daylight could enter. The hangings were all of bats' wings, and from the ceiling hung 12 cats, who filled the hall with their ear-piercing yells. Upon the long table 12 mice were fastened by the tail, and just in front of each one's nose, but quite beyond its reach, lay a tempting morsel of fat bacon. So the cats could always see the mice, but could not touch them, and the hungry mice were tormented by the sight and smell of the delicious morsels which they could never seize. The princess was looking at the poor creatures in dismay, when the enchanter suddenly entered, wearing a long black robe, and with a crocodile upon his head. In his hand he carried a whip made of 20 long snakes, all alive and writhing, and the princess was so terrified at the sight that she heartily wished she had never come. Without saying a word she ran to the door, but it was covered with a thick spider's web, and when she broke it she found another, and another, and another. In fact, there was no end to them. The princess's arms ached with tearing them down, and yet she was no nearer to getting out, and the wicked enchanter behind her laughed maliciously. At last he said, "You might spend the rest of your life over that without doing any good, but as you are young and quite the prettiest creature I have seen for a long time, I will marry you if you like, and I will give you those cats and mice that you see there for your own. They are princes and princesses who have happened to offend me. They used to love one another as much as they now hate one another. Ah, it's a pretty little revenge to keep them like that." "Oh, if you would only change me into a mouse too!" cried the princess. "Oh, so you won't marry me?" said he. "Little simpleton, you should have everything heart can desire." "No, indeed, nothing should make me marry you. In fact, I don't think I shall ever love anyone," cried the princess. "In that case," said the enchanter, touching her, "you had better become a particular kind of creature that is neither fish nor fowl. You shall be light and airy, and as green as the grass you live in. Off with you, Madam Grasshopper." And the princess, rejoicing to find herself free once more, skipped out into the garden, the prettiest little green grasshopper in the world. But as soon as she was safely out she began to be rather sorry for herself. "Ah, Florimond," she sighed, "is this the end of your gift? Certainly beauty is short-lived, and this funny little face and a green crape dress are a comical end to it. I had better have married my amiable shepherd. It must be for my pride that I am condemned to be grasshopper and sing day and night in the grass by this brook, when I feel far more inclined to cry." In the meantime, Prince Peerless had discovered the princess's absence, and was lamenting over it by the river's brim, when he suddenly became aware of the presence of a little old woman. She was quaintly dressed in a ruff and farthingale, and a velvet hood covered her snow-white hair. "You seem sorrowful, my son," she said. "What is the matter?" "Alas, mother," answered the prince, "I have lost my sweet shepherdess, but I am determined to find her again, though I should have to traverse the whole world in search of her." "Go that way, my son," said the old woman, pointing towards the path that led to the castle. I have an idea that you will soon overtake her." The Prince thanked her heartily and set out. As he met with no hindrance, he soon reached the enchanted wood which surrounded the castle, and there he thought he saw the Princess Sunbeam gliding before him among the trees. Prince Peerless hastened after her at the top of his speed, but could not get any nearer. Then he called to her, "Sunbeam, my darling, only wait for me a moment." But the phantom did but fly the faster, and the Prince spent the whole day in this vain pursuit. When night came, he saw the castle before him all lighted up, and as he imagined that the Princess must be in it, he made haste to get there too. He entered without difficulty, and in the hall the terrible old fairy met him. She was so thin that the light shone through her, and her eyes glowed like lamps. Her skin was like a shark's, her arms were thin as laths, and her fingers like spindles. Nevertheless, she wore rouge and patches, a mantle of silver brocade, and a crown of diamonds, and her dress was covered with jewels and green and pink ribbons. "At last you have come to see me, Prince," said she. "Don't waste another thought upon that little shepherdess, who is unworthy of your notice. I am the Queen of the Comets, and can bring you to great honour if you will marry me." "Marry you, madam?" cried the Prince in horror. "No, I will never consent to that." Thereupon the fairy, in a rage, gave 2 strokes of her wand, and filled the gallery with horrible goblins, against whom the Prince had to fight for his life. Though he had only his dagger, he defended himself so well that he escaped without any harm, and presently the old fairy stopped the fray and asked the Prince if he was still of the same mind. When he answered firmly that he was, she called up the appearance of the Princess Sunbeam to the other end of the gallery, and said, "See your beloved there? Take care what you are about, for if you again refuse to marry me, she shall be torn in pieces by 2 tigers." The Prince was distracted, for he fancied he heard his dear shepherdess weeping and begging him to save her. In despair he cried, "Oh, Fairy Douceline, have you abandoned me after so many promises of friendship? Help, help us now!" Immediately a soft voice said in his ear, "Be firm, happen what may, and seek the golden branch." Thus encouraged, the Prince persevered in his refusal, and at length the old fairy, in a fury, cried, "Get out of my sight, obstinate Prince! Become a cricket!" And instantly the handsome Prince Peerless became a poor little black cricket, whose only idea would have been to find himself a cosy cranny behind some blazing hearth, if he had not luckily remembered the Fairy Douceline's injunction to seek the golden branch. So he hastened to depart from the fatal castle, and sought shelter in a hollow tree, where he found a forlorn-looking little grasshopper crouching in a corner, too miserable to sing. Without in the least expecting an answer, the Prince asked it, "And where may you be going, Gammer Grasshopper?" "Where are you going yourself, Gaffer Cricket?" replied the grasshopper. "What, can you speak?" said he. "Why should I not speak as well as you? Isn't a grasshopper as good as a cricket?" said she. "I can talk because I was a prince," said the cricket. "And for that very same reason I ought to be able to talk more than you, for I was a princess," replied the grasshopper. "Then you have met with the same fate as I have," said he. "But where are you going now? Cannot we journey together?" "I seem to hear a voice in the air which said, 'Be firm, happen what may, and seek the golden branch,'" answered the grasshopper, "and I thought the command must be for me, so I started at once, though I don't know the way." At this moment their conversation was interrupted by 2 mice, who, breathless from running, flung themselves headlong through the hole into the tree, nearly crushing the grasshopper and the cricket, though they got out of the way as fast as they could, and stood up in a dark corner. "Ah, madam," said the fatter of the 2, "I have such a pain in my side from running so fast. How does your Highness find yourself?" "I have pulled my tail off," replied the younger mouse, "but as I should still be on the sorcerer's table unless I had, I do not regret it. Are we pursued, think you? How lucky we were to escape!" "I only trust that we may escape cats and traps, and reach the golden branch soon," said the fat mouse. "You know the way, then?" said the other. "Oh dear, yes, as well as the way to my own house, madam. This golden branch is indeed a marvel. A single leaf from it makes one rich for ever. It breaks enchantments. It makes all who approach it young and beautiful. We must set out for it at the break of day." "May we have the honour of travelling with you, this respectable cricket and myself?" said the grasshopper, stepping forward. "We also are on a pilgrimage to the golden branch." The mice courteously assented, and after many polite speeches the whole party fell asleep. With the earliest dawn they were on their way, and though the mice were in constant fear of being overtaken or trapped, they reached the golden branch in safety. It grew in the midst of a wonderful garden, all the paths of which were strewn with pearls as big as peas. The roses were crimson diamonds with emerald leaves, the pomegranates were garnets, and the marigolds topazes, the daffodils yellow diamonds, the violets sapphires, the cornflowers turquoises, the tulips amethysts, opals and diamonds, so that the garden borders blazed like the sun. The golden branch itself had become as tall as a forest tree, and sparkled with ruby cherries to its topmost twig. No sooner had the grasshopper and the cricket touched it than they were restored to their natural forms, and their surprise and joy were great when they recognized each other. At this moment Florimond and